Temtem! If you're new to my channel, it's the hot new thing. It's basically Pokemon, but it's not Pokemon. And it's on PC, which Pokemon never was, but which people really wanted. And it's an MMO, which Pokemon never was, but which people really wanted. It sounds ideal. But there's just one thing. Not everyone's loving it. Why is that, you ask? Oh, because it's pushing the leftist squidgy agenda and ramming the trans people down our throats and turning the kids gay, and would somebody think of the children? What's the haps? I'm Moroka and I'm here to give you my professional gaming opinion on gender-neutral options in Temtem. So what is the problem here? Temtem has an incredibly flexible character creation tool. You can pick a traditionally masculine or feminine body type, though, and this point will become important later, the game never asks you to pick a character defined specifically as male or female. You can pick from 3 sets of pronoun options: he, him, she, her, and they, them. And all characters can pick from the same pool of hairstyles and clothing options. It's an open-ended, mix-and-match approach where no option will lock you out of any other, allowing for any player to express themselves however they see fit. It's a well-executed and very progressive approach, and you'll be astonished to learn that some people don't like it. So let's take a hot moment to sit and poke holes in all their flawed reasoning. The developers Crema have been very good to me in helping research this topic because they've kept the entire discussion contained in this 150 plus page radioactive containment zone. I mean Steam thread.
As the research points out, hermaphroditism is abysmally rare to occur, and guess what? It's an anomaly. The issue lies when you pick the exception and try to paint it as the rule.
Let's start with an easy one, shall we? This one cites some actual medical figures of the incidence of hermaphroditism amongst the population. Now, research is good, but in this case the data is completely irrelevant. The attempt to inextricably link sex and gender is an argument usually presented by those seeking to push a transphobic narrative. Temtem doesn't really deal with sex in any way beyond the 2 body types, and Lord knows human bodies are pretty malleable when we want them to be, so whether someone has curves or not doesn't tell us anything concrete. Equally, it skims over gender pretty quickly too, not asking for your identity, but your pronouns, which, as we'll soon see, is not the same thing.
That their existence doesn't bother anybody is a cop-out. If an NPC casually mentions Jesus came and disproved all other religions, it certainly wouldn't get a pass as just there, not bothering anybody.
The world is a diverse place, whether you personally like that fact or not, and filled with people of all walks of life with their own experiences. Yes, this includes evangelical religious types. And yes, that type of character absolutely can and should have a place in a game. But the skill is in integrating that character in a way that wouldn't come off as either trying to push a message onto the player or mocking that character. And since everyone perceives things in their own way, you doubtless wouldn't manage to please everyone. But this argument comes across as deflecting a little because it hardly seems a fair comparison when religion has been pretty well accepted by societies ever since there have been societies. Meanwhile, LGBT plus representation in media has only very recently even begun to fairly portray the group. When you're accustomed to privilege, equality can feel like oppression. If you feel like LGBT plus representation is forcing a narrative, consider that until recently, you've had the privilege of seeing people who represent you portrayed fairly in the media your whole life.
Removing gender altogether and making it difficult for those who do subscribe to a specific gender to express themselves, and removing all traces of gendered body shapes for those who are comfortable with them? Unnecessary, limiting, one step too far. It will cause those obsessed by this to feel negative about the other features which would have been accepted otherwise.
We can and should decouple the concepts of gender identity and gender expression here. Gender identity being how you personally, or I suppose your character, identify, and gender expression being how you choose to present your identity to the world. For a large majority of people, this will fall into the standard binary, and their gender expression will tend to match their gender. For non-binary, genderqueer, and some trans people, the two may not be as closely linked. For illustration here, see noted YouTube makeup artist John McClane, who identifies as male, but expresses himself in a traditionally feminine way. The fact that Temtem allows you to mix and match bodies, hairstyles, clothing, and pronouns to your heart's content gives you a lot of options in terms of gender expression. But gender identity is very much an internalized thing. If you want your character to be a boy in all the conventional ways that society would accept, pick a masculine body, a boyish haircut, some men's clothing, call yourself he, him, and ta-da, you just made a boy without ever needing to tick a box that said, I am a boy. It's not so much that gender in the sense of identity was cut from Temtem, it's that it was never in any game, only ever gender expression. Whatever your avatar's own personal sense of their gender is between you and them. All the while, these character options simultaneously allow those who don't conform to the binary to express themselves with the same degree of liberty as everyone else. Isn't freedom great?
Both body types side by side here. Please tell me that the girl one doesn't look like the boy one.
This image very much illustrates the previous point, because yeah, if you pick baggy clothing and give them a shaven head, I guess everyone does look pretty similar. The second picture could just as easily be a trans man, a non-binary person, a tomboy, or any of a myriad of options really. You might be startled to learn that this works in real life too. Women can take on a traditionally masculine aesthetic if they so choose, and vice versa. As a guy with long hair, I've been misgendered before, mostly by drunk guys who about 10 seconds later decided they weren't into beards quite so much. Funnily enough though, if you pick traditionally feminine clothing options and hair, your character will suddenly look a lot more conventionally feminine.
Be honest with us. How often will dialogue options like these present themselves?
Granny is an interesting character because you can read a lot into the few lines of dialogue you have with her. I play a non-binary character with a feminine body, so my initial reaction to this, that an NPC, an old lady, might actually genuinely misgender you based on your physical appearance, was that this was an incredibly artful bit of social narrative destined primarily for the players who could appreciate it the most. But then Tulkas had the same conversation with her and had the same options, and he's just a dude running around topless. No, I hate to break it to you, but Granny just forgot her glasses. But I think she's interesting because whether you interpret her as some great writing, just a blind old lady, or oh my god, they're pushing the SJW agenda, comes down to your perspective on the world and what you want to see in her. So if you saw the latter, I think you're probably looking too hard for it, searching for a reason to be offended, Snowflake.
There are non-binary NPCs.
This is in the same context as Granny, implying that the inclusion of a non-binary person is indicative of pushing a narrative. Max very much falls into a similar vein, and as much as we all hate the little punk, they're actually a very well-designed character. Max is your rival, and for the most part just a blank slate for you to project whatever you want to see onto. I'd compare Max to characters like Frisk in Undertale, or one of my favourites, Nico from One Shot. These characters are far less about non-binary representation, though that's by no means a bad thing, rather they allow different players to interpret them differently. To touch on Nico specifically, I always saw the character as male and often referred to them as a cat boy, though my experiences here were likely shaped by my only prior encounter with the name Nico being, "Hey cousin, want to go bowling?" I was genuinely surprised to later find out other players had viewed Nico as female, because the game never actually specifies. Are both our experiences valid, despite being different? Totally. And that's actually a really great thing you can do in video games that you would struggle to achieve in any other medium. Max is written the same way, and for that reason I like Max. I mean, I obviously also hate Max with a stupid overpowered Temtem, but I like Max.
So, it's pro-consumer to turn away a larger portion of your audience, all to make a few feel welcome? The few that probably would have felt just as welcome without the pronouns? Sure, I saw on the Temtem forum that someone asked for it back in July, but I'm sure the people requesting it are far fewer than those that don't want it,
I love the idea that nobody wants gender-neutral pronouns because I have receipts. Yeah, there's hard numbers available to debunk this one, so bust out your Casio calculator wristwatches, nerds, because here's data. The first stress test of the game on January 13th saw 38,000 players play Temtem over the course of 4 hours. Since launch, according to SteamDB, Temtem has shifted somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million units. So let's meet that halfway and say they've sold something like 750,000 copies. 38,000 is over 5% of the player base, and feel free to disagree, but to me that feels like a good sample size. Now, technically, the overlap between stress test players and purchasers of the game will not be exact, but both of those audiences sit within a bigger Venn diagram of people Temtem appeals to, so I feel confident in saying any data from the stress test can be considered representative of the player base. Here's the fun figure we've been building up to. 6%. 6% of the player base in the Temtem stress test chose they-them pronouns for their character. That's about 2,800 people. And if the data is representative of the general population, which we've already concluded it is, that's about 45,000 people playing the retail version of Temtem using gender-neutral pronouns. That translates to just over £1.25 million worth of game sales directly attributable to people who wanted to play Temtem using gender-neutral pronouns. Now, I think it would be disingenuous to suggest that pronouns were the only reason they bought it, but one only has to look as far as such fandoms as Good Omens or Steven Universe to see how effervescently enthusiastic the LGBT+ community is for media which represents them well. I guarantee you those 45,000 people are a tremendous force for word-of-mouth marketing amongst their friends and allies. So, unless anyone has any data backing up the claim that not only did 45,000 people not buy Temtem specifically because they were triggered by 2 words, but that they also convinced others to not buy it too, then I'm just going to drop the mic on this one if you don't mind. Shit, that was really expensive. Why do people do that?
Americans and English-speaking people. I identify as her, der. Also Americans, there are 1 billion genders. The rest of the world, male/female. If you want to not have male or female in your game because you're scared you might exclude people who think they are a dinosaur, that's fine, but you are excluding males and females.
To the point about exclusion, I've already addressed this. The character creator doesn't exclude traditional binary genders. Simply picking the traditional binary choices is entirely equivalent. The first point, though, the idea that progressive gender identities are the product solely of Western society, or even more specifically American society, is demonstrably false and shows tremendous ignorance of the world around us. Many cultures around the world, and even throughout history, have their own take on non-traditional gender roles. The Navajo Native Americans of the southwest US recognize feminine men and masculine women as being distinct genders from feminine women and masculine men. Samoan society recognizes the Fa'afafine, oh god I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, as a distinct third gender, people who are assigned male at birth but who embody both masculine and feminine traits in a way unique to their own culture. Indian religious texts written between the 16th century BC and the 6th century AD make references to a third and fourth gender. These are to name but just a few examples, so quite contrary to the idea that nobody else does or has ever done this, the strict gender binary is actually found most deeply rooted in societies built upon Abrahamic religions, and in fact most everybody else is okay with a spectrum of genders.
In my personal opinion, developers need to stop bending the knee to people who don't play games and just want social points with a group of people who most likely don't game and just have this weird erection of power forcing people to use certain things for an agenda.
You shall not pass!
Nice gatekeeping. But here's something. I want these kind of features and more inclusive content, and I've been playing games for over 25 years, and actively making media about them for, sweet Jesus, over a quarter of that. What have I done with my life? So why should you be the arbiter of what games should be and what audiences they should be targeting, and not me, or frankly anyone else for that matter? But that's all a bit of a straw man argument anyway. Games are works of art like any other medium, and can be as politically charged or not as the artists want it to be. You don't get to tell the artists how to make their art, unless you commissioned it, and no, buying a copy isn't commissioning it. And on top of all that, we've already seen that there's another at least 45,000 people playing Temtem who demonstrably do want that feature, so it's hardly bending the knee to people who don't game as much as it is a sensible business decision. Adding one extra UI button at the character creation brought in thousands of new customers. Clearly, this was a terrible idea. Telling developers that the only people who play games are people just like me and all games must be made to my tastes, you must never cater to anyone else, is the type of gatekeeping which creates the stereotype of the toxic gamer. It's like a child throwing a temper tantrum, and it's not a good look, and I think we both know you're capable of being better than that.
It's always been he or she lives at number 64. they/them is used for groups of people and objects. And that's from UK English, not US English, the superior English.
Language evolves. It always has and it always will. Just go read some Beowulf written in Old English. It's simple enough evidence of that. Anyone trying to argue from a prescriptive position, which is to say that words have defined meanings and rules for usage, will find themselves frustrated to learn that lexicographers tend to disagree with this viewpoint. Dictionaries are instead created from a descriptive viewpoint, simply as a record of how words are used by people. This is why new words are added to dictionaries regularly, including, regrettably, espresso, with an X. So many people use the word incorrectly that it is now officially correct. You just witnessed our language evolving right here and now, in the modern day, and not as some historic curiosity. You may have picked up on the fact that I probably dislike the usage of espresso just about as much as our foramites here dislike the singular they, but that doesn't make it wrong. If people commonly and regularly use the word espresso to mean coffee brewed by forcing hot water through finely ground, darkly roasted coffee beans, then the word they is used to refer to a single person whose gender identity is non-binary because that's how people use it. Check it out, it's in the dictionary. Now, I've trawled through quite a bit more of the discussion on this, but most of the arguments keep coming back to these primary points. At the time of writing, it's up to over 150 pages of regurgitated points, which is 30 more just since I started writing and researching this video essay, and I don't think it's a valuable use of my time and sanity to keep going. There's so many attack helicopter quote-unquote jokes, it's like watching Ricky Gervais do stand-up. If you do have anything to add, I'll leave the comment section open below, but I'll be keeping an eye on it to make sure things stay civil, and I won't be shy with a banhammer if they're not. Remember kids, hate speech is not free speech. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like, and if you didn't like it, please definitely remember to leave a dislike because that fuels my engagement and search rankings anyway. I'm Morocco, I enjoy buying video games to play non-binary characters, and I will see you next time.